But let's go ahead and move on to a fun story. A fun story. Does involve a couple things getting blown away, but it's a lot more fun than that last story. This story was actually, in a roundabout way, a request on Twitter. Because I asked if we had a Cryptid Olympics, who should be involved in it. And the first people to respond were, on Twitter, the Cafe and Diner, which is cafe_and_diner. I really, really recommend checking them out. It's a really cool Twitter account. And then also Jester, who also is a follower of Cafe and Diner. Yeah, check it out. I've recommended that Twitter account a couple times. They got some really cool things going on there that I think is just right for the fans of the show. But they said Loveland Frog. That was they're like, Loveland Frog, Cryptid Olympics, he has to go. And I was familiar with the name Loveland Frog, but never looked into it. This guy's pretty dope. I don't know if he'd win the Cryptid Olympics, but let's take a look at his resume here. So we're going to Loveland, Ohio. Did you guys ever see that old show from the 70s, The Dukes of Loveland? This is where it took place. Loveland, Ohio. The year is 1955. Now I can do my doo-wop music that I didn't get to do yesterday. A doo-bop, ba-dop, ba-boo-bop, ba-dop, ba-ba-doo-dop, ba-dop. This guy's driving down the road. This businessman is driving down a road late at night in Loveland, Ohio, turning up a little bit of his doo-wop music, and he sees on the side of the road 3 humanoid figures just kind of standing up, and he's like, what? They look weird. They're on 2 feet, but they just look kind of lumpy, and their eyes are they're frogs. And what he's seeing is 3 4-foot tall frogs standing up, having a conversation on the side of the road. He starts slowing his car down, and then at one point, one of the frogs sees him, sees the human now watching them, and he turns, he looks at the human, he pulls a wand out, not the human, the frogman pulls out a wand, a big metal wand, like a magic wand, and then sparks shoot out of the top of it, and the businessman drives away totally scared. So that was really the origin of the Loveland Frog. It should really be Loveland Frogs, but became a local phenomenon. It basically became their Bigfoot. Everyone in Loveland was like, they hear this story, they're like, oh my god, there are frog people out there, da-da-da-da-da. Now, it was passed down from generation to generation. Dads would tell their kids, and kids would tell each other in the schoolyard, and all this sort of stuff, that better be careful, there's a frogman in the woods. Now, what's interesting is the first sighting, there's multiple variations of it, which tends to make you think it's an urban legend. Sometimes it's a businessman, sometimes it's a vacuum cleaner salesman, sometimes I think he's walking, sometimes he's driving. There's different variations, but they're slight. They all involve 3 frogs, a magic wand, and sparks. So the fact that those variations, as small as they are, do lend it a little more weight than the typical urban legend, like Bloody Mary, say you have her baby. Sometimes you say Bloody Mary 3 times. Sometimes you say it 10 times. Sometimes the urban legend's a little more concrete, gives it a little more weight, which is what concrete tends to do. But everyone's talking about this thing. It's their Bigfoot. So in 1972, when a police officer is driving down the roads of Loveland late one night, and he sees it, everything changes. It's March 3rd, 1972, and Officer Ray Shockey is driving down the road. He sees a 4-foot-tall creature, reptile, standing up by the side of the road. And it's fully illuminated by his headlights. He can see it perfectly. It's this giant reptilian creature that's 4 feet tall, standing up. And it climbs over a guardrail and kind of jumps down into the river. And it scares him to death. Absolutely. And he reports it. And everyone makes fun of him. They're like, oh, Shockey saw the frog, man. Shockey saw the frog, man. They're like giving him swirlies and wedgies. He's like, no, I'm an officer of the law. Don't do this. But he got teased. It would be the same thing. That's why Air Force pilots don't report that they've seen UFOs, or regular pilots or whatever. Because you're going to get ridiculed. And he was ridiculed. But he had a good buddy on the force, Mark Matthews. Now, he was also an officer. And he was like, you know what? I believe Shockey. He had a button that says, I believe Shockey. He's like, do you want to wear this? He's handing them out around town. People are like, no. I don't know who that guy is. But anyway, so Mark Matthews was on a mission. He wanted to prove his friend right. But then, he was also a cop. He also had to, arrest people and do traffic stops and stuff like that. He wasn't, he wasn't a one-man mission of, proof. He also had other stuff to do, but he's like, I'm going to run into this creature. I just know it, and I'll prove that Shockey was right. And then I'll win his heart. So one night, about 2 weeks later, very short amount of time, Mark Matthews is on patrol, and he sees something in the bushes. A big reptile. And he blows it to pieces. Doesn't investigate it at all. He just shoots it to death. Could have been an alien visitor. Could have been a last of its species. Could have used that magical wand technology to create sparks that would help win the Cold War. But he didn't even worry about that. Just... Those are all the birds flying away from the gunshot. Not the sound of this creature dying. Now, when he shoots it, dead... He walks up to it and he goes, that's not a frog. But I don't know what it is. It's 4 feet tall. It's a big dead reptile. With arms and legs and a little reptilian head. And that was it. No tail. I was like, what is this thing? So he picks it up, throws it in the back of a squad car in the trunk, takes it to Shockey. Now Shockey's at home. He's drinking some single malt. He's like, they'll believe me someday. I know they'll believe me. Or I'll show them. I'll show them all. And before he can enact his plan of vengeance on his bullies, Matthews shows up and says, hey, Shockey, you want to come check out my trunk? Got some junk in it. And he's like, yeah, let's go. Opens it up, and Shockey looks and he goes, that is exactly what I saw. That stands up on both legs. And Matthew goes, I didn't see it stand up on both legs necessarily, but I did blow it away before it had the chance to, Carl Owens out of there. So... At this point, they're looking at a giant reptile. It's not an alligator. It's not a crocodile. It's not a frog. But it's definitely some sort of unknown creature to them. So they have to go get it tested by, a scientist. So I imagine in real life they took it to, a college or a vet. But I would have loved to see them roll it down into the autopsy room of the police station. He's like, hey, Clark, you ever seen one of these before? And Clark's like, oh, dude, yeah, I can't wait to dissect this thing and find out what it is. Looks like straight up alien autopsy. But anyways, for whatever the reason, whether they took it to the autopsy dude, the coroner is the word I'm looking for, or they took it to a veterinarian, what Shockey saw and Matthew saw was a giant iguana that's tail had come off. So, to be fair, it didn't look like an iguana. It just looked like a monster. And when it was standing up by the side of the road, it was actually preparing to climb over the guardrail. So it wouldn't be able to walk like that. It wouldn't be able to jog down the street like that. But it was holding itself up and then fell over. And it looked like it was standing on both legs. So at that point, the thing is if if this series of events happened in any other location, a man says, oh, dude, I saw a 4-foot tall lizard walking around and fell into the river. And then 2 weeks later, someone blew it away with a shotgun and then said, oh, it's an iguana with no tail. That would kind of be it. But this, because it took place in Loveland, where the beloved Frogman lived, it was this crazy chain of events. And what's really weird is that outside of that first story, and then the story of the officers, there's no other real proof of the Frogman. There's a few blurry photos of it. Really, the best photo that's come out was when some nerds were playing Pokemon Go, running around in Loveland, and they clipped a picture of a creature standing in the water, looking at them with glowing eyes. Most likely fake. Because what Pokemon Go player is going to stop playing Pokemon Go long enough to open their camera up? None. Also, technically they should have caught him, but they didn't. So, I think it was fake. If the Loveland Frog monster, I keep wanting to add that qualifier on the end of it. If the Loveland Frog is real, I think the most likely thing is they were simply passing through. I find it interesting that they seem to be monsters, but they were talking to each other. Oh, dude, I just remembered something. I did an episode probably about 3 episodes back. I can't believe that I totally forgot about this. I did an episode about 3 or 4 episodes back called The Man Who Was Addicted to Abduction. Or Addicted to UFO Abduction or something like that. And it started this guy, it was featured this guy named Piers Zanfretta, who talked about being abducted multiple times, and I said the whole story was made up. But an interesting thing is when he was abducted on that ship, and that story took place in, if I remember correctly, in the 70s. He was taken aboard the ship, and the aliens were like, here, look in this vat. This is our most hated enemy. And in it was a giant frog. Now, it's possible that Piers Anfretta still made the whole story up, and he just read about the story that took place in the 1950s with the businessman. That's actually, it's possible, but I know it's possible. I can't necessarily say unlikely, but I would say my instinct tells me that if the Loveland Frog sighting is real, they were aliens. They were from not this planet. Because 4-foot tall frogs with magical wands would be really hard to not see until 1955. There's like stories of like old legends in the areas of frog people, but people think that's been retconned. It's really hard for 3 giant frogs to hide with a magic wand, get sighted, and then go completely off the grid again. Unless they were simply passing through our planet or dimension. I think it's and that would be why there would be no more frogmen sightings, because they were just there for that night. They were partying in Loveland, Ohio. Then they had to get to somewhere else. I wonder it's funny because when I think of the story, I'm not so curious about the frogs because I deal with cryptids all the time. I'm curious about that wand. Very rarely do we see cryptids wield technology. Which again makes me think it's more likely that they're alien than some sort of monster. You gotta wonder, though. We hear these stories of businessmen driving around at night, seeing something out of the blue, or out of the black, because it's night. They see a Bigfoot cross the road. They see a man-bat in Chicago. They see a Loveland Frog and his buddies on the side of the road. But how many of those people don't make it to their destination? And all that's ever found is an abandoned car, or a rowboat in the middle of a lake, or a house where the tenant just seemed to up and leave, or a little girl goes missing. We never hear the start of those urban legends, those cryptid stories, those alien encounters, because the only witness was a victim. That was a clip from our daily podcast, Dead Rabbit Radio. Dead Rabbit Radio is available anywhere that you listen to podcasts. It's daily paranormal, conspiracy, and true crime news. If you want to hear the full episode that this clip came from, check the link below. Please like and subscribe. And hit that little bell, too. That does some magical stuff. Thanks, guys.